Brian and his wife Jessica, a pretty blonde with long legs who looked like she could ride him several times over, decided to spend a long summer evening in front of the TV. Their vacation had just started yesterday, and they had a whole month of carefree relaxation ahead of them. The only thing that frustrated Jessica was that it hadn't occurred to her to organize a trip to the beach in advance. Every year they vacationed at the same family cottage on the Florida coast, where the owners were incredibly kind and hospitable, making it the most welcoming vacation home in the world. Despite their young age, Jessica and her husband were still drawn to familiar places of love instilled in them by their parents, who believed there was nothing better than vacationing in their own country. There was nothing worth watching on TV, and Brian, bored, began gently kneading his wife's shoulders, hoping it would lead to something. But they were interrupted by the doorbell. They jumped up, nearly falling off the narrow couch. Only Jessica's mother, Linda, or just Mom as she preferred to be called, could ring the doorbell like that. And of course it was her. 5 seconds later, Linda was already in the room, eager to share the happy news. But because she was in such a hurry, she was out of breath and asked for a glass of water first. As Jessica followed him into the kitchen, Brian squinted his eyes so Linda wouldn't notice and admired her figure, barely covered by the short top and tight leggings. Linda always dressed like that when it was hot and saw nothing wrong with it. She was still young in body and mind. She often advised her daughter to dress like that, and it was hard to argue with her. Her figure was truly stunning. Brian couldn't help but notice the similarities between Linda's figure and his own mother, whom he admired very much. In fact, the image of his mother often inspired him in bed with Jessica. Every time she asked for a second or third round, he thought of his mother, and suddenly he had all the energy he needed. Jessica was amazed at Brian's stamina. She didn't know where he got his strength from. It might have been a little strange for Brian to fantasize about his mother, but it made him feel really macho, since his mother was only a woman. Soon Jessica returned with the water. Following her mother's example, she walked around the house in her underwear during the heat wave, which pleased Brian because he hated having so many layers of clothes on. He looked longingly at his wife, whom he hadn't had time to fully enjoy just a few minutes ago, but it didn't matter. He still had a long night ahead of him. Taking a sip from her glass, Linda finally shared her wonderful news. "Dear children," she began, "I've learned from Jessica that your vacation plans have been thwarted because you're stuck in this cramped apartment. I wouldn't be a good mother if I didn't use all my connections to get us three a place in our favorite cabin. We're leaving tomorrow. So I thought I'd join you so you won't be bored." Jessica and Brian's joy knew no bounds as they rushed to hug and kiss Linda, grateful for her resourcefulness. Thanks to her, they wouldn't be stuck in front of the TV all vacation. Instead, they would soon be enjoying the gentle waves and warm southern sun. Linda had another piece of good news. In addition to renting the cabin, she had also purchased a separate compartment on the train for them, buying out all the seats so they could travel in comfort. To celebrate, Brian invited his mother-in-law to the best restaurant in town, where they toasted the start of their vacation. The dinner was delicious, full of laughter and stories. They talked about their favorite vacation memories, and Linda told anecdotes from her youth, which added to their excitement about their upcoming trip. But they didn't stay up late. They got up early in the morning. The young couple was so excited about the trip that they couldn't sleep and arrived at the station an hour before the train left. They sat on a bench enjoying the crisp morning air, holding hands and discussing all the things they would do when they arrived at the cabin. Minutes went by and Linda still didn't show up. It turned out that she had trouble sleeping too, and had tried to go to the station early in the morning, but had gotten stuck in the elevator when the power went out. She was rescued 15 minutes before the train left. Fortunately, the station wasn't far away, and Linda ran as fast as she could. Brian and Jessica saw her from a distance. It was impossible not to notice her, for she ran faster than a cheetah, and her short dress was pulled up much higher than it should have been. But all that didn't matter. The main thing was to catch the train. Linda arrived just in time to jump on the moving train. The conductor, a kind woman, allowed her to sit down, despite the strict rules. Brian held out his hand and practically dragged Linda into the carriage. They collapsed on top of her big red suitcase, which she had abandoned in the vestibule a few minutes ago. As they fell, Linda's lush breasts pressed against Brian's face. She was so exhausted after the run that she couldn't get up for a while. Strangely, Brian didn't feel any discomfort. On the contrary, he was carefully appreciating her curves. He noticed that they were even more plump than his mother's, which he thought was an advantage for him, as he knew his mother's figure from childhood. Linda finally managed to get up, and they headed to their compartment where Jessica was waiting for them. The family spent the entire afternoon discussing their vacation plans. They talked about places they wanted to visit, restaurants they wanted to try, and how they would spend their days at the beach. Linda couldn't wait to swim in the ocean, and Jessica reminisced about their previous trips, telling funny and cute anecdotes from past vacations. Time flew by, and before they knew it, night had fallen, and it was time to go to bed. Jessica, who was the youngest, went to the top bunk, and Linda and Brian went to the bottom bunk. Soon they were all asleep, but Brian couldn't stop thinking about what had happened in the hallway. He wanted more, wanted to compare Linda's curves to those of his mother. He stayed up half the night, and finally made the most important decision of his life. Lying in bed, he imagined what it would be like to explore Linda in a more intimate setting, and with each passing moment his desire grew stronger. The sound of the train coming down the tracks seemed to echo the beating of his heart, and he realized he could no longer ignore his desires. Linda was sleeping peacefully when suddenly she felt someone's hands on her body. She wanted to scream, but one of the hands quickly covered her mouth. She then heard Brian whisper, "Shh, Mom, it's me. I just wanted to hug you and kiss you. Is that so bad?" Linda was stunned, not knowing what to do. But she soon realized there was only one way out. Her hand slid under the sheet, and soon Brian was completely at her mercy. His dream had come true. He could finally explore her thoroughly, and Linda, in turn, felt his power. Jessica, however, was the least lucky of all. She was sound asleep during all this. In the morning, the wise Linda left the compartment, offering the young couple some privacy. She understood more than anyone else that in order for peace and love to reign in a family, happiness must be shared. Linda decided to spend some time in the dining car to give Brian and Jessica some alone time. She ordered a cup of coffee and sat by the window admiring the scenery. As he sipped his coffee, he couldn't help but think about what had happened the night before. He couldn't even imagine it, but now it seemed almost natural to him. She knew she had stepped over the line, but some part of her felt a strange satisfaction. She had always been proud of her figure and youthfulness of spirit, and now she realized that Brian's admiration was proof of that. Back in the compartment, Brian took the opportunity for intimacy. He gently woke Jessica with kisses, and soon they were cuddling. The excitement of their upcoming vacation, combined with the thrill of being alone, made their intimacy even more passionate. Jessica had no idea what had happened the night before, and Brian's newfound energy only made her love him more. She marveled at how attentive and loving he was, and felt incredibly lucky to have such a loving husband. After a while, Linda returned to the compartment, and they all continued the trip together. The atmosphere was light and fun, the three of them sharing stories, laughing and enjoying each other's company. Linda felt a strange closeness with Brian that went beyond the usual mother-in-law and son-in-law relationship. She knew that what had happened would remain their secret, something that bound them together in a way that no one else could understand. During the trip, they took turns seeing the sights from the train windows, taking pictures, and even playing games to pass the time. They played cards and even tried guessing, which made the trip even more exciting. Linda was a very lively participant, her laughter bringing smiles to everyone around her. She even shared a few anecdotes from her travels, which won over both Brian and Jessica. It was in these moments that Brian felt an ever-deepening connection with Linda, which was both exciting and comforting. The rest of the train ride was filled with laughter, conversation, and excitement. As they approached their destination, they began to make plans for their first day at the cabin. Linda suggested starting with a long walk on the beach, and then dinner at one of the beach restaurants. Jessica agreed, and Brian nodded with a smile on his lips. He couldn't wait to see what this vacation would bring, and he knew it had already started in an unforgettable way. As soon as they arrived at the lodge, they were warmly greeted by their hosts, who welcomed them like old friends. The familiar sights and smells brought back fond memories, and they were quickly settled into their room. They spent their first night on the beach, admiring the sunset and enjoying each other's company. The soft sound of the waves and the warm breeze made everything around them perfect. Jessica and Brian walked hand in hand, while Linda walked a few steps behind them and watched them with a smile. As they went to bed, Brian couldn't help but think about how much his life had changed in just a few days. He had always loved Jessica, but now there was something more, something that made him feel even more alive. But he knew the vacation had just begun, and he couldn't wait to see what other adventures awaited them. He imagined days filled with walks in the sunshine, laughter, and closeness with Linda, whom he now craved even more. As he fell asleep, he felt excitement and anticipation, realizing that this was a summer he would never forget. Linda also lay awake for a while, her mind swarming with thoughts of what had happened and what might happen next. She realized she had gone overboard, but she couldn't deny the joy it brought her. She had always prided herself on being young at heart, and now she felt more awake than she had in years. She glanced over at Brian, who was already asleep, and a smile played on her lips. This vacation would be unlike any other, and she was ready for whatever was to come. The next morning, the family woke early to the cries of seagulls and the sound of waves crashing on the shore. Linda suggested a swim before breakfast, and everyone enthusiastically agreed. The sun had just risen and cast a golden glow on the beach. They headed for the water, and Brian felt a sense of freedom as he plunged into the cool waves. Jessica and Linda followed him, splashing playfully, their laughter echoing across the empty beach. It was almost a magical moment, as if the entire ocean was at their disposal. After swimming, they returned to the cabin for breakfast. Linda had brought fresh fruit and pastries, and they enjoyed their meal on the porch, overlooking the beach. Jessica remarked how beautiful the morning had been, and Brian agreed with her, casting a quick glance at Linda. He couldn't help but feel a rush of excitement at the sight of her. There was something about her energy, her spirit, that drew him in even more. Later, they decided to explore the nearby town. They walked the streets, went into small stores, bought souvenirs, and took pictures. Linda seemed to know everyone and charmed the store owners, making Jessica and Brian laugh from their interactions. And they bought local spices, handmade jewelry, and even a few bottles of wine to enjoy at the lodge. The day was filled with so many joyful moments that it felt like a dream. In the evening, they returned to the cabin and decided to have a barbecue on the beach. Brian was in charge of the grill, while Jessica and Linda prepared the side dishes. And they ate at sunset as the sky was colored in shades of pink and orange. It was a perfect evening filled with good food, laughter, and the warmth of companionship. After dinner, they sat around a small fire they had built, telling stories and enjoying the sound of the waves. Linda's stories were especially fun. She had a way of making even the simplest story enchanting. When the fire died down, Jessica yawned and Linda suggested they all go to bed. Brian could feel the excitement as they walked back to the cabin and wondered what the night would bring. He realized he was treading on dangerous ground, but the excitement wouldn't let him stop. Jessica was fast asleep, exhausted from the day's activities, but Brian couldn't sleep. His thoughts went back to Linda. Linda didn't sleep either. Her mind was swarming with thoughts of options. She knew what they had done was wrong, but she couldn't deny the attraction she felt. She shifted her gaze to Brian's bunk and saw that he was still awake. Their gazes met for a moment, and in that silent exchange they both realized that things were far from over. Whatever boundaries had been crossed, whatever lines had been blurred, there was no going back. And as Linda closed her eyes, she was overcome with a sense of anticipation for the rest of the vacation and what might happen next.